always a bit of an irony with tech, isn't it? We're here to talk about tech. So really nice to see you, Neil, again. We've had some really interesting, thoughtful, inspiring and challenging chats, which is always great. And great to be here with members of the British Computer Society doing some really great work, and there's some real great opportunities here as well. So hopefully you'll find this chat useful. We'll answer as many questions as we can. If we don't know the answers right here, right now, I'm happy to go away and try and find them. And hopefully this is just part of an ongoing conversation, because there's many of us who collaborate on this to get the best minds coming up to the right answers, or at least in the right direction, the better place that we'll be in.
Yep, thanks, Kerry. So if you sort of Fireside Chats, we'll have a few questions to talk about. Ethics Committee, we discussed some of these and some topic areas that we felt were good to hear your views on. So the initial ones around that important aspect of AI governance and policy. AI regulation is evolving rapidly, both here in the UK and other countries. And wonder what sort of key developments in UK AI governance do you think that businesses and professionals, like our colleagues here tonight, that they should be aware of?
So this is a really important question. There can be a bit of nervousness out there to AI regulation, particularly from sort of businesses where ultimately it's based on profiles and profits in the most part. Although there are not-for-profits, of course. Just tell us what we can and we can't do. Then we know what we're working towards. The issue with that is the UK has taken a different approach to the EU and a slightly different approach to countries like the US and wider. So you've all probably heard of the EU AI Act, which came into law last year now, 2026. It will become more or less absolute, and there's a phased approach to that. And the EU AI Act is in law. It's rules-based, what you can and can't do, low risk, medium risk, high risk, and absolutely do not, including, AI use for facial recognition, unless there is a real threat to national security and so forth. The UK, however, took a very different approach, and this was under the previous government. You may be aware of the UK's AI white paper, which set out the UK was going to go off on a different road, and it is principles-based to support the pro-innovation approach. So UK regulators, many of them, and there's, depending on which day it is, there's 90 to 100 regulators in the UK. A lot of them you will have heard of, like key economic regulators, the Financial Conduct Authority, Office for Gas and Electricity Markets, Competition Markets Authority, right down to education, health, midwifery, and many, many more. And UK government said to the regulators, we want you to regulate AI. You tell us how we're going to do it, but it has to be based on the UK's principles-based approach. And that was all published. There was a mass consultation. It got lots of feedback from businesses, industry, developers, and that translated into the UK's principles. So safety, security, robustness, appropriate explainability, transparency, fairness, contestability, and redress. Now, in between that, we had a change in government, and the current government is still very much pro-innovation approach to AI, but it has now moved towards the AI Opportunities Plan, which you may remember was quite heavily featured on the mainstream news and in the tech press, or possibly going 6 weeks or so ago. A day seems a long time in AI at the moment. It's quite hard to keep up with what's happening out there. And that sets out exactly what the UK wants to do. It will work with skills, capabilities. It will expect businesses to have those capabilities. Regulators will provide sandboxes and so forth. So whether you work in a regulated industry or not, if you are just solely UK based, your respective sector regulators will be setting out, we'll say, good practice guidance, because best practice is often thought to be beyond the lawyers. And this practice is emerging. A lot of the standards, which ultimately the AI standards, the tech data standards, some of which are here already, because some of it is technology agnostic, and some of it which is solely focused on AI, still in development. So the UK's approach, again, with regulators, if you look to your regulators, and they're always a good place to look for guidance and toolkits and so forth, is not to be too prescriptive. Because ultimately, if you're too prescriptive, this is what you can and can't do, you may possibly thwart innovation. And the UK currently thinks that we can regulate AI based on current legislation. There are lots of wraparounds for this, i.e. GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations. AI is covered in those now over at the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. They're putting out a lot of good things there, including some guidance information on how to communicate AI decisions being made at businesses for consumers and citizens, for example. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer. How do we balance regulation with innovation? The UK's approach is very much pro-innovation. My own personal opinion, I'm not here to speak on behalf of anyone in particular, as we'll see how that goes as things start to emerge, move forwards, accelerate, new AI uses come along. But many sectors are basically saying, use AI, where you like, where you think it's appropriate to, even in high risk areas such as, nuclear, energy, health, for example. But it's about following, good technology development principles and, a good functional safety approach to governance, drive the down risk to a level that's practicably acceptable, which is a term that the Health and Safety Executive use in law, which is quite a helpful sort of guiding principle. And even if you think to aviation, they use AI, flying planes and all kinds of things that they do in the air, which is quite incredible now. And most of us will get on a plane now as part of commutes. You just think, oh, how long is it going to take me to get off? Am I going to get am I going to have a nice cup of tea? Is the Wi-Fi going to be working? So that's kind of where we're at. We'll see where it goes going forwards. And you also may have heard that the AI bill legislation, the legislative approach in the UK is currently on hold for now. It may not happen in this current Parliament. Again, it's to really support the pro-innovation approach, and that comes through from the AI opportunities plan. So, look on gov.uk, which is where a lot of, this information will be, and the AI opportunities plan really does set out the direction of travel now, and that includes things like lots of sandboxes and playgrounds for people to come along and test use cases and live cases.
Thanks, Kerry. Yes, that's there's that balance between the sort of innovation and governance and how you manage that, which I guess everyone is seeing different perspectives. So you have covered a few of the areas that I've been wanted to talk about initially. I think the next area then was around, I guess, the ethical perspective on that, which was the Ethics Group. We spent a lot of time looking at perceived rights and wrongs in IT, some of the issues around that. We had a meeting before Christmas looking at what we learned from the Horizon scandal and the impact of that, where IT systems went wrong, and some of the decisions around there seem to be ethical ones that various people made in IT companies, in the post office for the Horizon scandal, and in government. So in terms of ethical AI, which is obviously a major focus for the AI developments, what do you feel are the biggest risks today in AI ethics, and how might organisations mitigate against those sort of risks?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and you'll often hear a lot of debate, from the academics, very important, to technology developers, to those on the business end. Everyone's got a slightly different take on ethics, and ultimately it's do the right thing. Even some of the big technology development companies out there, you've got the big players, of course. A lot of them don't talk about ethics, they talk about responsible AI. So it's always worth to be mindful of that, and that is because of their global footprint. Like, who are we in the Western world to talk about, what's right and wrong for ethics, perhaps, in China and elsewhere. So there isn't kind of a level playing field in that respect. But from a business point of view, integrating ethical principles and diversity considerations in, to the organisation's AI strategy. And, most businesses and companies should have an AI strategy, or they should be looking to one or considering developing one. And anyone here that does, work on the tech development side or the strategy side for, tech development, or, whether it's development or ongoing running systems, should be aware of this. But they have to support their business objectives at the end of the day, because it's not that we're necessarily reinventing the wheel here, but there are lots of things that, businesses and organisations, and also, technical people or technical advisory people, wherever you sit in that sphere, or technical research and thinking and development. And they're things like, embed ethical AI into business strategy. And that means incorporating things like responsible AI principles into the company's core missions and values. That's starting to emerge, but not really seeing that yet. A clear AI governance framework, including responsibilities, but it's across the whole AI life cycle. So from ideation to development to training to implementation, but also taking the system out of use, which many seem to be forgetting. And it's really important that those AI governance frameworks, which could be an extension of your current governance frameworks, because you may have a framework for traditional technology, digitization. Some of the AI tools, for example, may be docking into your current infrastructure. So it's not necessarily about completely reinventing the wheel here, but also looking at tying ethical AI goals into key business performance indicators, so KPIs. And that's where you can bring up, the societal good element, whether that's for your customers, your consumers, whether you're looking at environmental aspects, but which also supports business growth. So a lot of thinking there. And then there's areas like, design AI for diverse user groups. A lot of it goes back to user testing. There's a great saying in AI, and it comes from Dame Wendy Hall, who co-wrote the UK's fourth industrial strategy before it became the AI white paper. And Dame Wendy Hall is the UK's representative on the United Nations AI Advisory Board. If AI isn't representative of those it serves, it's not ethical. We should be saying no. And that's something that's always stuck with me. So it does go back to, good user-led design principles, inclusive design principles, conducting user research for anyone that's coming up with ideas, or, developing tools and systems, or even discussing with, a lot of these companies that are trying to sell tools and programs in, just to understand, their thinking behind it. Building AI systems that are accessible to marginalised and underserved populations as and when appropriate. If you think back to the UK's approach to AI regulation, there's lots of reference to treating consumers fairly, treating customers fairly. So that's kind of when the ethics side will also come in. It will be outcomes based. And then I don't think this is reflective of just AI, it's reflective of technology, whether that's traditional technology or whether it's a move to digitized operating models at businesses. We must ensure AI products and services are designed to accommodate people with disabilities, different levels of vulnerability, different levels of digital access, and also in the different cultural contexts. We can talk about diversifying AI development and deployment teams. That also links to, AI representatives on the boards coming from technical, non-technical and diverse backgrounds. And then if we get back to the actual, AI models themselves, we often hear about bias and mitigating bias in data and models. So things like, auditing training data sets, for example, addressing any imbalances that could perpetuate, those kind of unethical harms before they get to that point. Implementing fairness-aware machine learning techniques that prevent discrimination. There are laws, there are anti-discrimination laws, there are human rights laws, which, AI falls falls under. There are health and safety laws which AI falls under, and getting to a fair outcome. How are you going to do that? Are you going to have fairness audits, for example, as part of your tech build ideation, the implementation phase, the research that's going through? And then there's right down to things, like prioritize explainability and user trust. How is the communication going to happen to those end users? Are they aware that you're even using AI in decision making? Are they aware that they're being treated fairly or unfairly by AI? So they're quite difficult things to look at, but it's just a bit of a whistle-stop tour because there's a big long list that you can go through.
Thanks. Yeah, as you say, it's a huge area in many respects. But equally, as you say, there's probably existing frameworks that fit around much of this. Again, at my own role at university, with a lot of those issues are cropping up in terms of fairness and avoiding bias and things in systems. Just related to that, didn't explain it explicitly there. One thing we're discussing a lot is the sort of socioeconomic barriers. So one thing we're finding is students, wealthier students are paying for good AI systems. The less wealthy students, or those there's access to that, they can't pay for that, so they access for free ones. And some, because they don't understand them or have access at all, don't do it at all. So you get these sort of financial barriers, social barriers, education barriers. How do you think that might play out in the longer term?
It's quite a difficult one. I mean, you could say AI may exacerbate that because there's more focus on it currently. Is financial ability, social inclusion, understanding any different from any other technologies? We'll have to see how that plays out, of course. And you can even go right back to within the homes. If mum and dad or carers aren't talking about what the younger generations suggesting that they should be learning, it's going to be quite difficult. Again, my personal take, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else, the curriculum within the UK and wider across EU member states and across the world is being looked at. You know yourself, you're working for a university, it can take a long time to update courses because of the rigor that's required, and there's always going to be blockers in the system. So can we move fast enough? And I think those of us that are able should actually try and support those that aren't able to, for whatever reason. And there might be a social mobility initiative popping up soon. But yeah, we definitely can't keep our eye off the ball there. Whether we can make it a level playing field, I'll sit on the fence and say not quite sure. Has it ever been a level playing field? Possibly not. Is AI going to be an extension of even social media? Businesses have to pay to play. Will citizens have to pay to play going forwards? You've already seen OpenAI moving to a chargeable model. It's going to be completely not for profit. So there will be winners and those that may struggle to keep up. But we have to make sure that we make that playing field as level as we can.
Thanks, Kerry. So we'll look at kind of the impacts around AI and around the way it's being rolled out by organisations now. So in your experience with particularly multinational organisations, mentioned that a few times, a sort of global perspective, would you say any particular industries that are leading the way in responsible AI implementation that maybe other industries can learn from?
I would recommend looking into some of the high-risk industries like nuclear. They are quite a way ahead in their thinking. AI is used quite heavily in the nuclear industry, and all it takes to keep that going and safely. And as I mentioned previously, at the worst end, you have AI running various systems and reactors, and kill-off switch don't work properly. We could have catastrophic life consequences. So I would look to the nuclear sectors, and they do follow a functional safety model, which is really good for driving down risk, just like aviation does, and also parts of the energy sector as well. So anything that's a critical sector, I would look to just because they're duty bound by, you know, more legislation, more laws, but they're still looking at innovation. So that's where I would recommend going to. And if, you know, companies can look at functional safety and incorporate that into their AI governance models, and their tech stacks and their tech flows and their processes, I think that puts you in a good place.
That's Kerry. Yeah, I think it's interesting to say when there's such a safety critical systems like nuclear, if they're already using them, then they should be good exemplars of hopefully safe practice.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
there's lots of AI use cases across all industries out there. You know, if you're customer, consumer facing, there's lots in that front end, you know, whether it's chatbots, email automation, you know, and natural language processing recommendation, agentic AI agents are being looked at, you know, more and more now. And a lot of those use cases can be scaled across many industries. But I think the differentiator with those safety critical industries is the rigor that they put into the governance. And if you start at a really high bar, then you can see what's appropriate for you.
yeah, I think it's an important issue. And then looking ahead to maybe the impact of AI further, so the kind of future outlook and societal impact. What sort of role do you think AI is going to play in the future of work and for business and for governance? How do you think that's going to develop in maybe the medium to longer term? It's very hard to look ahead that far.
It's an interesting one. I mean, there's a lot of hype regarding AI out there, and it's about cutting through and, you know, seeing what is of substance. You know, you only have to Google AI and set up some news alerts, and, you know, every industry is, you know, looking to upskill its workforce, and that is the right thing to do. If you look to the UK's industrial strategy, it did say, for example, countries like the UK would lose up to 10 million jobs, but in time, AI might create 12 million jobs. That could be a net increase in jobs. But whatever the figures and projections and forecasts are, and it depends where you look to and whatever else is happening in the world as to what those forecasts will be. You know, again, there is a saying that, you know, AI won't necessarily replace you, but you could be replaced by somebody that's using AI. And I think we'll start to see new roles coming along, you know, such as perhaps data cleanser. Would be quite an interesting one I've seen of late. I mean, you've seen, you know, the UK government just within, you know, the past week or so, you know, the civil service is going to be looked at, and, you know, by a couple of years' time, you know, more tech data, digital professionals will be hired than ever before. So I don't really want to talk about people losing roles. Nobody wants to see anyone, you know, out of, you know, a job, whether you're employed or, you know, you're working for yourself. But we are in a technological revolution, and, you know, the way we do work, the way companies are run, you know, full digitization, you know, AI takes the boring process grunt work out of things. The way we're interacting with companies is changing quite rapidly. Our behaviours as humans is changing quite rapidly to that. We've got AI in our smartphones now, of course, which is only going to improve going forward. So I do think we are on a cusp of big change. As I said, you know, national curriculums are being looked at. What the timescales, you know, are for, you know, upskilling a whole nation, for example. We've kind of heard that before. But also, if you think back to, you know, when the internet was, you know, first came about and was sort of starting to be developed, everyone was going to lose their jobs. Did that happen? No, we just started working in a slightly different way. And even if you look to, you know, key economists like Keynes throughout, you know, going back, you know, in history, you know, the talk of people completely losing jobs has never transpired. So even if you look at, you know, technology used in logistics industries, for example, there's a lot of talk about autonomous vehicles. We'll all be riding around in our electric vehicles. What does that mean for the grid and AI in the home going forwards? Well, that may change the way you approach things, but they'll still need people to do the jobs that come along with those, for example. So again, it's about, you know, finding, I guess, if you're a tech developer, tech researcher, what are those opportunities, and how will we be living and working into the future?
Yeah, just having it's been a common feature of innovation and computer innovation, certainly for the last 150 years, has been around changing work, not necessarily getting rid of work. So, kind of going back to something you mentioned earlier about the inclusivity aspects, and looking at how we can do that. Also, you're a strong advocate for social mobility around AI, but going forward, how do we ensure that more inclusive AI workforce and maybe a more diverse representation in AI leadership? I mean, computing generally, we still have this very biased gender imbalance. You see it from secondary school, GCSE computing, A-level computing, university computing, IT industry in general. But for AI, can we maybe buck that trend? Is there a better way to have that more socially diverse, more inclusive workforce, do you think?
I think speaking idealistically, yes, of course we can, and it's always something we should work towards. We definitely, we should be diverse by representation, and that means always, cultures, lived experience, socioeconomics, background, skills, capabilities. Absolutely, we should. In reality, we know there is a bit of a skills shortage. Lots of those that have got the technical skills and the non-tech skills have been snapped up, or if not snapped up, to move to different countries and support there. So I think it's about sort of technology people wherever you work, or support across the piece, really being advocates as well. And it goes back to, if it's not representative, it's unethical, we should say no. And I think that, for me, that goes back to even ideation, build and development teams. For example, if it's a group of all white middle class people, and that is a stereotypical example I'm using there, and it has been called out in previous times, a bit like all white panels that you see speaking about tech inclusion and AI inclusion events. I think we need to get better at that. As for things like quotas, that's a difficult one. That's fraught with difficulties. But it's also, I think, about future workforce and future business planning. What are the skills and capabilities that you'll need from now on in going forwards as part of an ongoing talent development pipeline? Because this isn't just a start-stop approach. We're going to have to look at the longer term. Quantum is not too far ahead of us. If that transpires, you could have quantum fueled, algorithms, for example, and a whole raft of other use cases which are starting to emerge. So I think this is the kind of the train that we're not going to get off. Can businesses, organizations, can they support with some of the upskilling and the knowledge sharing? Everyone has to start somewhere. Knowledge is to be shared. It's not to be held anywhere. Some companies and businesses are starting up their own sort of AI, in-house, sort of talent accelerators. Almost put your hands up. Who wants to go on this journey? And we'll support you as and when we can. But obviously, that's the will of the companies, and whether they've got that kind of funding. So I think it's a tricky one. There isn't an easy answer on that, but we always have to kind of work to get better at diversity inclusion, because ultimately it just enables better outcomes for AI and for people that it serves.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Yeah, it is so it's not a silver bullet, but it's things we can probably all make efforts towards in our different roles and activities.
Yeah.
So moving on from that to sort of the role of professional bodies like British Computer Society. Obviously, as an organisation, we're keen to make IT better for society. Our role of the Ethics Group is trying to promote, again, the good use of computing with the difficult decision of what makes good use of it necessarily. But what role do you think professional bodies like BCS can play in shaping our governance and ensuring these ethical standards going forward?
I think you've got a very important role, and I think, in fact, a leadership, I would go further and say, a transformative leadership role to play in that. I mean, we are in a technological revolution. Ethical standards need to be deployed. So I would strongly be advocating, there's a lot of consideration to, trained by BCS, for example. Is that going to be the go-to accreditation, for example? There are opportunities there. And also there may be an opportunity as well. You've got thought leadership, you've got contributing to consultations on AI, you've got events and obviously lobbying that you would do as part of your ongoing work and development, and obviously acquiring members and continually improving the member offer and transforming the member offer, of course. But I think there's something also, lots of membership bodies have codes of conduct. Can the BCS develop an AI practitioner's code of conduct, whether you're tech or non-tech, for example? We've spoken about AI systems could, significantly impact society. That's positively, but also possibly negatively. We don't want to treat anyone unfairly or cause any AI harms, without the clear ethical standards which we've spoken about. However they're incorporated into governance, there is a risk of those unintended consequences. You've got bias, privacy violations, misuse of AI technology, get in the wrong hands, it could be weaponized, of course. So I think, any sort of, professional code of conduct or, a voluntary pledge, for example, would be, a great thing to think about. Prioritise fairness and transparency, for example. Obviously, you'd have to have a lot of discussions, and I'm sure there'll be lots of different challenges from, lots of different people in lots of different areas, of course, which would be good. But ultimately, if there could be a formal code of conduct that actually enables ultimately business trust and public trust in the work, which computer technology professionals do, provides a framework for ultimately addressing some of these ethical dilemmas that might arise in AI development and deployment. I think that will put it in a good place. And if you look to quite heavily regulated sectors such as medicine and law, they have codes of conduct to ensure ethical practices. And I don't think AI should be any different, considering all the conversations that are out there about its potential societal influence. So I think there are areas which BCS has got the opportunity to lead, if there is obviously the will to support that. And I'm fully aware that membership bodies are often run supported by volunteers, and it's bits of everyone's time as a when. So pace can often be a challenge that we're all up against. But yeah, there will be some recommendations that I would make.
Thanks, Kerry. Yeah, I think I've been discussing a lot the current BCS code of conduct in the ethics group, and looking at how sort of fit for purpose that currently is. And I think AI is potentially a big case for reviewing things like that, or looking at some of the other certifications that are currently there, which might be seen as voluntary for now. I mean, partly building a couple of areas we were discussing earlier before the meeting. Do you think there was a case for BCS or other certifications then in that kind of ethical and fair AI approaches that professionals could do that would encourage them to implement ethical AI frameworks?
I think there's always been a bit of a push and pull between those that are quite entrenched in the technology, the AI DevOps world, and the people that work on the other side of the fence, whether they come from an ethicist background or sort of more of a societal and a community background. Just a bit of colour, I've often had butted heads with technology developers still, even to this week. Why does ethics need to be part of a technical sandbox? Well, good ethics is part of getting to safety and secure AI and explainable AI. So if you set the right conditions and values, the rest of it hopefully should follow. So I do think there's definitely a place for it.
Thanks, Kerry. And you partly covered this already, but just as a final question for me before we move on to the Q&A part, was around that AI education itself, and a bit more about inclusion again. and that social responsibility, and you've been very proactive with. But for things like the BCS, other organisations looking at doing AI education and training, how do we make sure that we make that training and education as accessible and inclusive as possible, and we don't again end up deepening that sort of divide potentially?
Yeah, I mean, again, really interesting question. I guess it depends who the respective audience is here. I mean, you're looking at things like, is pricing a barrier to entry? Could BCS possibly, have a few sponsored places to support social mobility, support new entrants coming in that might otherwise have that barrier, of course. And also, it's about thinking about the way people are learning now, the behaviours and the attitudes to learning. Yes, there is still a place for long in-person courses, but also equally as successful are the very short sort of snippet almost bits of courses where they're on demand. Sort of a 60-minute tutorial, and these are the top things you need to learn, and these are the things you need to read, and we'll see you next week. So I guess it depends what the model is going forwards. Definitely recommend a hybrid approach, but again, it all goes back to kind of cost, doesn't it, and the pace. It might even be, if it's okay by the BCS ethics committee, of course, you have a few courses that are sponsored by, just to kind of get people that perhaps wouldn't be able to pay to come in. And it's also, I guess, part of BCS's commitment to ensuring that good workforce of the future, the talent pipeline, as well as keeping standards up of your current members, of course.
Thanks, Kerry. Yeah, that was a really good point. So I think we sort of covered the areas we talked about before. I think the ethics committee, we had a few topic areas which we explained and gone through. We're interested to hear your insights there. So I think we've reached the end of our discussion.